They remember the name, but not the man. They hear Eliot Ness and think of headlines, of raids, of the words "the Untouchables" etched in bold across the crime pages of a bygone era. But those were just the battles. The real war was quieter, dirtier, fought in alleyways of politics and behind the stained glass of official corruption. I wasn't after fame. I was after the truth. And in my time, the truth bled. I was born in Chicago in April of 1903, in a neighborhood that smelled of coal smoke and ambition. My parents were Norwegian immigrants, hard people, honest people. They ran a bakery, and I spent my early years dusted in flour, not gunpowder. But I saw the city for what it was even then, a place where lines were drawn, where power wasn't granted by votes but by fear. My older siblings chose quieter lives. I couldn't. At the University of Chicago, I studied economics and criminology. I was fascinated by the structures behind crime, the money flow, the networks, the silence it bought. When the Volstead Act came into effect, the streets changed. Prohibition wasn't just a law, it was a market correction. It gave birth to empires. Bootleggers, racketeers, and killers found purpose. Honest men found bullets. In 1927, I joined the Prohibition Bureau. Not because I hated alcohol, I didn't, but I hated the lie. The idea that justice could be bought, that power was something inherited or stolen, not earned. The Bureau was already rotting. Agents were on the take, and raids were often tipped off before the doors were even kicked in. I started at the bottom, pushing paper, watching trucks roll past unchecked, hearing the laughter of men who thought themselves above the law. But I didn't bend. I didn't take the envelope. In 1929, the Department of the Treasury tapped me for something new. The Bureau of Internal Revenue needed someone to lead an assault on Al Capone's financial empire. They couldn't touch him for murder, extortion, or vice. Too many bought witnesses, too many dead ones. But taxes, that was math. And math, in the end, is incorruptible. I had one condition. I would choose my own men. I picked a group with no loyalty to anyone but the badge. Most had never worked together. Some didn't even like each other, but none of them could be bought. That was the rule. You don't drink with gangsters. You don't owe favors. You don't flinch. They called us the Untouchables. The press loved the nickname. I didn't. It made us sound like saints. We weren't. We just refused to rot. We started with surveillance, brewery by brewery, warehouse by warehouse. We mapped Capone's operations, his trucks, his drivers, his accountants. The city was laced with his influence. Every raid we planned was a risk, not just of failure, but of betrayal. We ran our own wiretaps, tailed our own suspects, raided stash houses with no backup. Every success we had made the next step harder, and we did succeed. Bit by bit, we choked his supply. We poured his profits into the sewers. Capone responded with bribes, $5,000 here, $10,000 there. Then came the threats. Letters slipped under my door, phone calls at night. My wife started sleeping with a pistol under the pillow. I changed my route to the office weekly. I didn't tell my mother where I lived. And then there was the bullet through my kitchen window. That one got my attention. We pressed harder. Eventually, we seized ledgers, detailed accounts of payments, shipments, shell companies. The evidence was there in ink. Not blood, but close enough. Capone was a criminal, but also a businessman. He paid no taxes, laundered everything, and laughed while he did it, until we closed the books on him. In 1931, Capone was indicted on 22 counts of tax evasion. The murder charges never stuck, but the government doesn't forget a dime. He was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. They sent him to Atlanta and later to Alcatraz. The day he was led from court in handcuffs, the city exhaled. Some cheered, some cursed. I just walked away. But here's the part they never write about. What happens after the headlines fade? After Capone was locked away, the machine didn't stop. New faces stepped into his shoes. The flow of booze slowed, then shifted. Politics crept in like mold. I was promoted, then transferred. The department wanted me in Washington. I refused. I belonged in the field, not behind a desk. In the years that followed, I tried to keep clean. I took cases that mattered. Public corruption, organized crime, vice. But everything was getting more complicated. The line between good and evil blurred. Prosecutors got cautious. Judges got nervous. The public lost interest in dry agents. And then there was the case that nearly broke me. A shipment of illegal alcohol tied to a corrupt mayor. We had the evidence, we had the witnesses. But every time we tried to move, something leaked. Our suspects disappeared. The warehouse caught fire the night before our raid. And the judge? Suddenly transferred to another district. It was like trying to punch water. I stood in court, holding ash where there should have been proof. I began to wonder if the battle was over, if we had won the war, but lost the peace. By 1935, the Bureau had changed. Leadership rotated like cards in a deck. Some of my men left for private security. Others disappeared into quieter lives. I stayed, out of duty, out of pride, or maybe just because I didn't know how to do anything else. I looked around and saw a city that had forgotten what we had done. Capone's name faded from the headlines. The next generation didn't fear him. They never smelled the blood in the gutters. They thought crime was a storybook thing, something for movies. Maybe that's why they started making them. They made films about us. The Untouchables became icons. Men in fedoras, gripping Tommy guns, talking tough and walking taller. But the truth? We bled. We lost friends. We saw corruption where others saw parades. The cost was never small. And I knew it wasn't over. Not for me. Because when you stand in the way of kings, you don't get to just walk off stage. They say every hero story ends in one of three ways: glory, death, or disgrace. I didn't get the first two. That left the third. After the lights of Chicago faded, after Capone was locked behind bars and the Untouchables were dissolved into memory, I found myself drifting. I had spent my best years staring down gangsters, and now I was being offered desk jobs, policy posts, places where ambition went to die in paperwork and protocol. In 1935, I was approached with a new challenge. Cleveland. The city was bleeding from within. Corrupt officials, mob control, a crumbling police department. It was a chance to clean something again. I took it. They named me Director of Public Safety. The job was big. Police, fire, traffic, politics. They wanted a miracle. They expected a myth. What they got was a man already worn thin. But I went to work. I sacked dirty cops, reassigned the lazy, and brought in new recruits with unshakable integrity. I walked the streets myself, in plain clothes, inspecting stations and patrol routes. I cracked down on illegal gambling, hit the brothels that paid off city officials, and started audits that reached into every smoky backroom Cleveland tried to forget. At first, it worked. Crime dipped. The press praised me. Ness brings Chicago steel to Cleveland, they wrote. But then came the torso murders. Bodies started turning up. Headless, limbless, dumped like trash in Kingsbury Run. Men, women, no pattern. Just carnage. The killer mocked us, left trails that vanished. Cut his victims with surgical precision as if to say, "You're not the only one who knows how to clean a city." We chased ghosts, interviewed thousands, arrested the mad, the broken, the violent. But nothing stuck. The public wanted blood. The mayor wanted results. And I was staring into the same darkness I thought I'd left behind in Chicago. I took risks. One suspect, a doctor with ties to mental institutions and war trauma, slipped through our fingers again and again. We knew he was the one. We just couldn't prove it. Not cleanly. Eventually, I ordered a raid on a hobo camp, torching it down to disrupt the killer's movements. The media turned. Civil liberties, they cried. Excessive force. It didn't matter that people were dying. What mattered was that the symbol of integrity now looked like he was cracking. I was no longer untouchable. By 1942, the mayor quietly asked for my resignation. No trial, no firing, just a nod, a letter, and a city happy to forget. I tried to pivot, took private jobs, security consultant, executive protection, even a brief stint with a federal agency during the war. Nothing fit. I had spent too long hunting ghosts and fighting giants. Filing expense reports felt like betrayal. And the money? It vanished faster than my reputation. I invested in a new business venture, a company developing safe, non-alcoholic beverages to replace the bootleg market. The idea was noble. The execution was a disaster. By the time I hit 45, I was broke, living paycheck to paycheck. My name, once revered, now drew polite nods and uncomfortable silence. When people heard Eliot Ness, they thought of a legend, but legends don't pay rent. I wrote a book, or rather I dictated one, The Untouchables. I didn't intend to glorify, I just wanted to set the record straight, to tell the truth, even if no one asked for it. A writer named Oscar Fraley helped finish it. I didn't care about the style, I just wanted it out. It was published after I died. Yes, I died before the world remembered me. In May of 1957, my heart gave out. I was 54, no parade, no state funeral, just ashes scattered in a lake near my home. A quiet end for a man whose life had been anything but. People say I drank too much near the end, that I was bitter. Maybe. I won't deny it. There's a price to knowing how the sausage is made, to having seen how deep the rot goes and how eager the public is to look away. But I never sold out, never took the envelope, never let the rot in. And in that, I remain untouched. The world changed, crime adapted, suits replaced Tommy guns, blackmail replaced bullets. But the core, the hunger for power, for control, for silence, never left. They've made movies about me, TV shows, men playing men who played me. I don't mind. Let the myth grow. Maybe it inspires someone. But if you really want to know me, the man, not the name, know this. I walked into rooms full of killers with nothing but a warrant and a badge. I stood my ground while my own government looked the other way. I faced bullets, bribes, and headlines. And when the world turned its back on justice, I stayed. Because I believed in the law, even when it didn't believe in me. I used to believe that justice was a sword, sharp, swift, unforgiving. That if you held it long enough, the world would come to respect its edge. But time dulls all blades, and mine was no exception. In the years after Cleveland, my reflection became a stranger. The man in the mirror no longer had the eyes of a hunter. He had the eyes of someone haunted, not by ghosts, but by omissions, by the things he failed to stop, by the shadows that slipped past him while he stared down the bright lights of public duty. I moved to Cootersport, Pennsylvania, a small town, the kind where no one asks questions if you don't offer answers. I took a modest job with a company developing electronic security systems. It was honest work, quiet work, no raids, no death threats, just wires and circuits, and silence. But silence is its own kind of noise. I tried to live simply. I remarried, built a home, hosted friends. I chopped wood in the winter and mowed grass in the summer. But the past has a way of dripping through the cracks, even when the windows are shut. Some nights I'd wake with my hand reaching for a pistol that was no longer there. Other nights I'd stare into the dark, listening for footsteps that never came. I read the papers, watched the headlines, new crimes, new kings, new wars. Organized crime didn't vanish, it evolved. Where once there were bootleggers, now there were drug traffickers. Where once a gangster shot rivals in alleys, now they wore tailored suits and wrote policy. Sometimes I wondered if anything I did made a difference. But then I'd remember Capone in cuffs, the look in his eyes, not rage, not fear, but disbelief, as if he had finally encountered something he couldn't control. And I'd remind myself that moments matter, that the weight of history often turns on the smallest fulcrum. My health declined, too many cigarettes, too many drinks, too little peace. The doctors told me to rest. I smiled. I had done nothing but rest for a decade. In early 1957, I collapsed while climbing the stairs. My heart, the same one that had carried me through gunfights and politics, had finally decided it was tired. They moved me to the hospital, hooked me up to machines. My wife sat by the bed. She read the paper while I pretended to sleep. I wasn't afraid. I had faced death too many times to give it more power than it deserved. I just wished I'd had more time to say what needed saying. Because here's what they won't tell you in the books and films. Justice is messy. It's not about the headlines. It's about the nights you sit in a car for 10 hours watching a warehouse. It's about the guilt you carry when your actions lead to someone else's blood. It's about holding the line even when you know the war is lost. It's not about being a hero. It's about refusing to be a coward. I knew I was fading. The doctors didn't say it, but I saw it in their eyes. That quiet sympathy, reserved for those beyond help. A week before I died, I received a letter, hand-delivered. It was from a young officer in Chicago. He said he'd joined the force because of my story, that his father had told him about the man who couldn't be bought. He said he wanted to be like that, He thanked me. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. It was enough. On May 16th, I died. No gunfire, no ceremony, just breath, then no breath. But before the end, I thought of that night we raided Capone's South Side depot. The smell of burnt grain in the air, the crunch of glass underfoot, the look on my men's faces, focused, fearless, alive. I remember thinking, this is what it means to serve. They cremated me, scattered my ashes on Lakeview Cemetery, the same ground where dreams are buried and legends fade. And then, the world moved on. Years later, my name resurfaced. A book, a movie, a television show. Some got it right, most didn't. But I didn't mind. Let them remember the story. Let them remember the fight. If a single person stands up tomorrow because of something I did yesterday, then I lived well. And if anyone asks who I was, tell them I wasn't a myth. I was a man. A flawed, driven, relentless man who believed that the law mattered, even when it didn't win. Tell them I didn't back down. Tell them I stayed clean. Tell them Eliot Ness walked into hell and didn't blink.